Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
So today on Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, we have a special guest, a friend of mine for several years, the database legend, Charles DeHart. Charles, how's it going, man?
It's going good. How are you?
I'm excited. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad that we finally are able to do it. Apologies in advance, everyone. I'm having some serious technical difficulties here, so the quality isn't going to be the best. But Charles, if you don't mind, let's rock and roll here, man. You are known in the industry for having one of the most comprehensive databases. I've seen it myself. It's incredible. I want to know anything you're willing to tell us about it, but why don't we start here? Tell us a bit about how you found mobile home parks, and for those who don't know you, a little bit about you and your background and where you came from.
Sure. So when I first got into mobile home parks, I was working as a government security contractor in Baghdad, Iraq. So I'd been in the military. After the military was over with, I kind of did the typical, or at least in the military, everyone kind of breezed past us and got into the working world. And so, I got out of the military at the age of 27 with no college degree, and there was this company called Triple Canopy that was paying $150,000 to $200,000 a year to go back over to Baghdad and do security for the U.S. Embassy. So I took that job, which is kind of like a black hole, and basically felt like real estate was kind of my way out of continuing to go back overseas. So somewhere around, I don't know what it was, deployment 9 or 10, somewhere in there, I got into mobile home parks. So I kind of found it through a real estate agent, had turned me on to that mobile home parks, and I went to a Frank and Dave boot camp and then got really into it. And that's kind of when I started building my database. And so it was a real, for me at that time, it was building the database was my way out from this black hole of continuing to go overseas. So it was like a huge necessity to build it. And then eventually it became, I guess, really good because I keep hearing this, it's the best database in the world. So, hopefully it is, but it was all built out of necessity.
Well, I'm a little biased here because you're my friend. So of course I'm going to talk you up. But no, that's something I didn't know. You got started in like 2009, 2010?
No, it wasn't. It was 2011 is when I took that job, and I started the database in 2013.
Gotcha.
So, but it was that was like my 9th or 10th deployment by that point.
A lot of folks view mobile home parks as their way out from their job. I think it's fair to say a lot of folks describe their jobs as a black hole. I found myself saying that, but oh my God, you literally were in a black hole.
It kind of was, but it was, I don't know, I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed the work that I did, and I enjoyed the people that I was with. So, when I was there doing it, it seemed like a black hole. And then after I got out of it, I've been away from that job now for 3 years. A lot of my friends are still doing that type of work in other locations, and it was a fun job looking back from this perspective. But they're obviously jealous of what I'm doing now. So it's all like grass is greener kind of stuff, I guess.
That is the perfect way to put it, because I know a lot of folks are jealous of what other folks have, and I think the truth of the matter is you really never know what someone else has. And that's a big reason among a bunch of reasons why I wanted to have you on, is to kind of talk about how the grass isn't necessarily greener. And I think the first thing I really want to talk about is something you just alluded to, which is, so you and I met in 2015. You had already been working on your database for years when you and I met. Can you talk to us about how many hours and how much you had to grind to get that database?
Yeah, you make it sound like it's so. I guess you have to understand my typical day there in Baghdad was I'd wake up at, I don't know, like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and then we were typically doing some type of thing around 9 o'clock in the morning every day. But typically, we wouldn't. My working day was done by about 1 p.m. every day. So from 1 p.m. until I usually went to bed around 10 or 11 o'clock at night was pretty much wide open. And during that time period, we weren't allowed to do anything. We weren't allowed to go out in the town or anything. You were stuck there on the embassy. So there was a couple of options. I mean, you could watch TV or you could play video games. Instead of doing that, I just did databasing. So it wasn't like this epic grind or anything. It was nothing to do. So I just did that. And I think that's probably that was my advantage in that regard, was that I'd be over there for, 4 months at a time, and I'd have 10 hours of just nothing to do every single day. And that's what I did with those 10 hours every day.
So tell me, how long did you work on your database before you started to outreach? Were you like, hey, I'm going to spend, my 10 hours all databasing, or did you leave a hair for outreach?
It took me forever to figure out how to do the databasing. So I didn't outreach to an owner until about 90 days into the project. And during that time period, and I just spent the last 15 days of that deployment that I was overseas reaching out to them. And that's when I put my first park under contract.
I remember you telling me a story about having either cold calling or calling someone back from the embassy.
Yeah, the big challenge was I had a phone in my room, but it was a typical, I think it was a California phone number. And then when you dialed it, it would go to a switchboard, and you'd have to dial a 7-digit room number. And there was a whole bunch of hoops you had to go through to get to my room. So I couldn't use that number. I had a cell phone from Iraq, which was if it came on your phone, it was 18 digits, and no one's going to answer that. And then I had my cell phone, which is $3 a minute. So I had to make all my cold calls were from the cell phone because
at $3 a minute.
Yeah, our Wi-Fi was absolutely terrible there. We couldn't even use Skype or anything else because it would cut out and it would sound like a robot. Well, the thing was really is I only had, so my rotations were about 4 months overseas and then a month home. I've got 4 months, and I want to try to get a contract on something. So I spent 15 days trying to get a contract, and it's like the clock's already ticking now. I got 35 days or whatever. I got to actually get it under contract at this point, and I've got to get my due diligence done, and then try to close it while I'm back overseas, which that wasn't that hard because I had the embassy. They could do all the notary stuff there at the embassy. So closing deals wasn't hard there.
So what other type of hurdles did you run into back then? Because I'm sure the challenges now are totally different. And I think the important thing there is that you were literally in a different country, and it was $3 a minute to talk to someone on your cell phone. Your options weren't great, and you found a way to persevere. So if you're going to be humble, Charles, I'll brag on you a little bit. That's really impressive.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It was fun.
Why do you feel that is?
Actually, I don't know. I just think just having the multiple moving pieces and all these things standing in your way, I think the test is really the fun part. When you're starting out, you don't really realize it while you're in it, but when you are done with it, when you look back on it, you realize how fun it was.
A lot of entrepreneurs, when they reach a certain level, even the most successful entrepreneurs, I think it was Simon Sinek who talks about that in his book called Starting with Why, where he basically says some of these top entrepreneurs that a lot of people are aspiring to be, when you ask them, they all talk about starting over. They all talk about going back to mom's garage or the basement or wherever because they're yearning for that fun. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, after all of that, too, I don't know, it was just full of challenges. And beginner's challenges, all the little pitfalls and mistakes you make, all those things are really fun when you look back on them, but they're very frustrating while you're in the eye of the storm.
It is fun. I actually really was hoping to talk more about your database, but this is honestly, I think, a lot more valuable to folks. So to kind of pivot from the questions that I sent you to begin with, could you talk a little bit more about, a lot of folks are starting with nothing in the regard that they have no experience, no network, no money, or at least not much money. I know you had some advantages and some disadvantages, but what advice would you have for folks just who feel like they're starting with nothing?
You're starting with your own determination. So you can have all the money in the world, but if you're not determined, or if you don't possess those qualities, then it doesn't matter. Like, all the advantages can be given to you in the world, but if you don't want it bad enough, it's not going to happen for you. And I think that's the mentality that you have to have when you're getting into business, especially if you're not set up. I mean, if you're not coming to this game with like a big, family office backing or some other thing that's got a ton of money behind you and you got all these resources, if you're just coming into it by yourself and you're going to go try to buy, 1,000 pads or whatever you're going to try to do, you got to find that one thing, like, what is nobody else going to be willing to do? And then you got to go do it, because that's what's going to make you successful, is being the guy that's willing to do whatever it takes.
I really couldn't agree more. I feel like what you and I shared in common was that first off, we loved it. Loved it. I mean, it was a blast. And yeah, like looking back, there are a lot of really stupid hurdles that you and I respectively should not have overcome. We should have quit and we didn't. And it reminds me of that. I think it's Marcus Aurelius who says the obstacle becomes the way. In other words, if you don't let an obstacle end you and you fight through it, it becomes your success story, right? So for me in entrepreneurship, there's like so many random stupid things that happen. I mean, even just today, I've never have experienced before, would never guessed I was ever going to experience it. And a lot of times you have no one to call to tell you the right answer. And that's to me the heart of entrepreneurship. But to shift a little bit, what types of ways do you think someone coming in today, because even a couple of years ago when you and I started, it was totally different. What advice do you have for someone coming in today who's not well capitalized or well experienced, or, they don't have the type of resources a lot of these like PE shops and funds have?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for innovation in our industry. There's a ton of dinosaurs out there, and there's a ton of innovative ways to do things now. Someone's going to approach our industry in a different way, and they're going to do something different that's going to make a big wave. I don't know what it is. I don't know who's going to do it, but somebody's going to do it. But there's always some type of, I think development might eventually come into play at some point in our space. I think the need is obviously there. It's just if there'll ever be an incentive to build parks, that's obviously an opportunity that might come up. But there's going to be some type of innovation at some point. It'll come into our industry and we'll make some room for someone who is paying attention. So just pay attention.
So I've got a couple other questions for you that the more I think about it, Charles, the more irrelevant they are. And let me just read them off and explain why I think they're irrelevant. Because
I've gone completely off script, so...
Yeah, I know. We totally had something planned out. And The questions that I wanted to ask that I now really feel are irrelevant are: how long did it take to start seeing some serious deal flow, and how the response rates changed for you, and in the regards like who is answering and returning calls now versus when they used to. And here's why I think that's largely irrelevant to ask you now. It's because 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was fundamentally different, and it's not going back. So instead of asking you that, I think the more relevant question is, what are you seeing now?
I think what I've seen lately has been that there needs to be a resetting of expectations in terms of the yields of these parks. So like, you used to be able to get a really nice yield premium over like investing in an apartment complex. So let's say I was going to go into, I don't know, just any random decent metro, and let's say I could go into that metro and buy an apartment complex for a 7 to 8 cap. Well, I could probably go buy a park in that same market reasonably for somewhere around an 8 to a 9 cap, get like a 1 point yield premium on the cap rate. Maybe the debt's not quite as good on a mobile home park usually, but usually you're going to be looking at 1 to 2 points of yield premium over the apartment stuff. And it was really just because of the stigma. The reality of the situation was, and this was like the reason why parks were so great, is that apartment complexes, the P&Ls tend to fluctuate a little bit more in an apartment complex because, you get more turnover and you've got more variable costs in an apartment, whereas in the mobile home park, it's pretty, especially tenant-owned communities have almost no variance on the rent collection. So you get a yield premium Plus you had better stability than all other housing. And that was what was so great about them back when they weren't as popular, is because everyone who owned parks knew they were a better deal than an apartment. And then there was a ton of people who thought the exact opposite. You were very contrarian by owning a park back like 4 or 5 years ago. But nowadays you're not. Everyone's kind of like cat's out of the bag kind of thing. So I think that the people who are investors in mobile home park deals, their expectation, we're just kind of all waiting around until their expectations are reset to where they're kind of like okay with the same returns as apartment people are. So a lot of apartment, syndications are offering like preferred return rates of like 4 to 6%. Mobile home parks, you look at the funds that are out there, mobile home parks, it's like 8% preferred. So I think until the industry sees the preferred returns go down, it's a lot harder for people raising money, retail capital at least, to compete on deals on pricing. And you have to compete on pricing nowadays, because if you can't, then you're not going to find that many deals. But it's really hard to compete on pricing when you're paying an 8% preferred return, because it's just not, the market's not that way anymore. So, it'll take a little bit of time for those expectations to reset and for investors to be willing to take lower preferred returns and just increased amounts of ownership. Once that does, I think that people even raising money, retail capital, can go out in the marketplace and offer 7 to 8 cap price point for a deal and get it. I don't know, but at least from my perspective, where I'm at, that's kind of the challenges that I've run into. Is the capital is probably more expensive than it needs to be. It needs to be probably priced the same as more like apartment capital.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think what's happening right now is you have a lot of folks trying to consolidate this industry, and what they're doing is they're taking a macro strategy and applying it on the micro level. And kind of what I mean by that is they'll pay a 4 cap or below for a strategic mobile home park, where if you're just looking at that one acquisition, you look at it and you go, these guys are nuts. But what they're doing is they are purchasing parks for X, Y, or Z strategic reasons, whereas they're making up that loss somewhere else. Be it, hey, we need a tax shield, we're going to utilize accelerated depreciation, or this is an opportunity zone, or X, Y, and Z reason. And what happens is when you do that on the primo properties, that makes sense to do that on an institutional level, the brokers are going to have that trickle down to the smaller properties where that does not make sense. So what you're seeing is a trickle down effect, in my opinion, where people are making macro decisions on the micro level, and people are looking at it as on a per property level, and then allowing that pricing to trickle down. And when you have people who have raised a ton of money, millions of dollars, and feel the pressure to place that money, they then go to those less desirable properties and start bidding those up and start paying those prices. And I think eventually it'll correct itself, but I don't think it's ever going back to the way it was, if it was ever even really a golden age.
Well, you and I have the same perspective, because we started it around the same time. And we were there kind of like under the radar. But I think the best opportunities I've seen lately are infill. So if you can set yourself up for like being able to do huge infill projects quickly and do them better than anybody else, it seems like those guys are really making money these days. Whereas the people who are just trying to buy really well and just do an operational turnaround, that's what I used to call them, is operational turnarounds. Those operational turnarounds are pretty much, people just pay for all the upside now.
Right.
So you don't really see that many of those operational turnarounds that look like great deals. They're just the investors like, well, the first 6 months is a black hole. We're probably going to lose money, so it prices into the purchase. We're going to lose money in those first 6 months because we're doing our turnaround. But after the turnaround's done, it's going to be a 7 cap. We paid premium price for it. So that's kind of the stuff I'm seeing now. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but
couldn't agree more. And the tough thing about bringing homes in is you've got to find a way to keep your costs down, because the numbers do not look good if you're spending $15,000 to $20,000 to bring a home in and then slap someone in and not be able to sell it. The cash program has its flaws, and that's definitely where there is difficulty, there is opportunity. But I think that, like Mike Conlon said when I interviewed him, you can only take a certain number of projects on at once. And the tough thing I think people are going to struggle with is, if you're coming in with this mindset of I'm going to scale up a portfolio in 12 months, You may be able to do it, but I got to tell you, I work every day at this, and it is really difficult. It is easy to outsmart yourself and buy some stupid properties. It is really difficult to find something where the investors are happy, you're happy, and the tenants don't get screwed over, right? So I think, one big thing that I try to do with this podcast is I try to help people kind of readjust their expectations because, and I think you'll agree with me here, Charles, I think people should get into this industry. I think we need more smart, hardworking people because there is a serious crunch on affordable housing. And I think people who really care about others and who really genuinely speaking want to improve the conditions of some of these mobile home parks, they should get into this industry, but you should get into it not with this idea that you're going to get 10 caps everywhere and you're just going to bump rents, pass through utilities and be done. I think the people who are going to be able to really succeed in the next 5 years are those who are willing to grind it out like you did, like I did, who are willing to make sacrifices and who are willing to reinvest in their properties to give their tenants a good product. Because I got to tell you, to have a giant fund and not feel like you can allocate the money properly may result in the tenants ultimately paying for that. But Charles, I'd kind of like to end it on a twofer. Number one, I would love you to say whatever you want to say with regards to, what you're doing next. How can you help folks and what are you up to nowadays? And then obviously the low-hanging fruit, which I'm sure a lot of people tuned in just to hear you answer, is do you want to set the record straight for any reason, shape, or form based on what's happened the last couple months?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer number one. As far as what's next for me, I've gotten to see you and Ian's business run very well the last couple of years. I mean, obviously you guys work your asses off, and everyone can see that. So I am still in buying mode. I'm actually working with a guy that I've known for a couple of years, and he's buying a deal up in your neck of the woods. And so we're taking a look at that deal, and maybe we'll buy it, maybe we won't. But still buying deals. I still like the business, and also doing some stuff on the broker side of things. And who knows if that's going to work out or not. I mean, the broker space is I'm starting to find out is horribly crowded as well too. But we're trying to figure out some way to maybe be a lot more competitive on pricing and maybe do something more of a sales coordination type of thing. Do sales for a flat fee and then just basically, because a lot of these owners, they're just getting I'm partly to blame for this, but they're just getting annihilated with letters,
Yeah.
sly broadcast stuff, and everything else. And so what my brother and I had kind of come to the conclusion of, I was talking to just a ton of these guys that are just beside themselves with these offers. When they're getting great offers, it's just that they're just getting annoyed. Is to kind of just put ourselves between them and all of the offers, and then we'll field them and we'll strategically go after offers for a couple of weeks and just give them a breather from having to deal with all this crap, and just for like a flat fee of something like, I don't know. I mean, the brokers are getting paid a ton of money for just one deal, but just for like a really small nominal flat fee, just kind of coordinate that whole thing and take the stress off of the seller. So we've thought about doing something like that. It still leaves a little bit of room for the brokers who are already in the space to have their own clients and build their fee on the buy side and everything else, but just to kind of relieve this ridiculous amount of stress that these owners are going through these days. Aside from that, as far as, I don't know what the record is right now as far as what's going on, but Sunrise Capital Investors, they're going to continue going on. I don't know, they're going to keep going with what they're doing, and there's no bad blood between us, and they're going to, we kind of built this company to where one day all three of us be able to leave it in the hands of the employees to run. So it's already pretty close. So there is no real concern with me leaving as far as if you're an investor in that company. I mean, it's been set up to where we could all leave eventually one day. So that's, I guess, as far as number two, that's about, if there's anything else you want to elaborate on, we can certainly do that.
No, not at all. I just know how humble you are, and I know the type of character that you have. And again, I wanted to give you a chance to say anything you felt the public needed to know about you, because I can't say enough good things about you, and I want to make sure that folks know it.
No, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, I'm gonna still stick around in the business, and I don't know, for all the people that are listening, and hopefully I I can help you guys do your deals as well too. So definitely still really enjoy the mobile home park business and real estate in general, and not going anywhere. So you guys will have to live with me.
Well, Charles, man, I can't thank you enough for finally coming on here, man. I think this was some outstanding content.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, rock on, Charles. Thanks again, man.
All right, we'll see you later.
Would having my due diligence list help you? If so, I will let you have it for free. That's right, my list that took me 3 years to develop and includes plenty of fixes for mistakes that I made that now you can avoid. All absolutely free. All I ask for in exchange is leave me a 5-star review and a comment. Screenshot your comment after it goes live and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, let's connect. This episode was inspired by a listener just like you. Even if you don't have any ideas for future episodes, let's still connect, as I'm sure there are ways you and I can help each other out. I'm looking forward to chatting soon.